Well, I'm thankful to be with you today. Didn't know what it was going to be like, to tell you the truth. Um Yesterday's a day that I spend typically Monday, catching up on things of my own personal life, bills and chores around the house and all of that. And it didn't turn out that way yesterday. There were other things I got into. And so I had all these plans thinking, well, what today would be like. But the fact is, we don't know what today will be like. Say it with me, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Remember Hebrews 3 and verse 13, but exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. So I was lying in bed last night. I was awakened about 1:30. Terrible pain in my chest and my stomach. And I had some problems. But what immediately came to me was, I'm at an age now where I might have a heart attack, and maybe I'm having a heart attack. And I realized, well, if I am, I need to be ready to meet the Lord. I just assumed so many things today that I'd get up and do because I get up and do those things every day. We dare not take anything for granted. That's an expression that we use to say that, we believe something is true without having any evidence of it. It's also an expression that we use to show where we have neglected something. You can take your health, for example. I take my health for granted many times instead of appreciating it on the good days and giving God the thanks for it. There's a great temptation to take it for granted and say, well, I'm in good health today. I'll be in good health tomorrow. But I don't know that. We can take our job for granted. I've had a job for 20 years. I'll have it tomorrow. We don't know that. I can take my spouse for granted. I can say, hey, this person's been my spouse all this time. They're always going to be my spouse. I can just treat them any way I want. Of course, that's not a biblical principle, but what I'm saying is there's a temptation to take things for granted. And so I came to that realization as I lay in bed this morning that I've been taking too many things for granted, that I just think because that's the way they've been, that's the way they'll always be, and that's just not the case. So I want you to think about a couple passages with me quickly this morning, just to kind of get our minds back in the game and be thinking about, what it means to appreciate what God gives us every day, and to appreciate the blessings, to appreciate our health, everything that God gives us. Let's just make sure that, on a regular basis, we're giving Him thanks for that. We're not taking those things for granted. Well, let's go over to the Bible, and let's look at James chapter 4, and start there. That's a good place to start, where you have this mindset. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, and make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. So, as we think about appreciating what God gives us, the very first thing we need to think about is our life. Just because we've had our life, all our lives, doesn't mean that we'll have it even a moment longer. It can end so briefly. That's why James describes it as a vapor. A vapor is not around very long. I had coffee this morning, and I enjoy the coffee makers right in front of the window, and the morning light comes in, and you see the coffee vapor, the steam going through the sunbeams, and that's one of the things I enjoy. That smell, and that it just kind of wakes me up, and yet that vapor, it's only there a moment, in just a second, it's gone. And that's the imagery that James uses to talk about our lives. It's just even if you live 100 years. I mean, I'm 57 years old now, and it just seems like yesterday I was 18. The time has just flown by. And that's because our lives are like a vapor. They just appear for a little time. I know sometimes when we're waiting for something to happen, or when we're grieved, or when we're sick, it seems like time just drags by. But then look back at your life and look how the years, maybe the moments drag by, but the years have flown by. And so we ought to say, if the Lord wills, we'll live, and we'll do this or that. And I'll tell you, the Apostle Paul, he's one that he demonstrates this for us. For example, over in 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and in verse 17, Paul's talking to the brethren at Corinth about the fact that he wants to see them. But he says in 1 Corinthians 4 and verse 17, "For this reason I've sent Timothy to you, who is my beloved and faithful son in the Lord, who will remind you of my ways in Christ as I teach everywhere and in every church. Now some are puffed up as though I were not coming to you, but I will come to you shortly, if the Lord wills. And I will know not the word of those who are puffed up, but the power." So you see, Paul uses that phrase. He knows that everything is contingent upon the Lord's will. And listen, he knows that from experience. For example, when you look over at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verses 17 and 18, Paul literally sees that this is totally up to the Lord, if where I go and what I do. He says over there, "But we, brethren, having been taken away from you for a short time in presence, not in heart, endeavored more eagerly to see your face with great desire. Therefore we wanted to come to you, even I, Paul, time and again, but Satan hindered us." You see how Paul, he always used that phrase, "if the Lord wills." Do you realize that according to this verse, apparently there were many times that Paul started making plans to go to Thessalonica to see the brethren? He wanted to do it. He desired to do it. To do that, it takes planning. If you think it takes planning for us today, I mean, we can decide at the last second we want to go somewhere, hop in the car and go. In Paul's day, it took much more planning. I mean, food and transportation and clothing and all of that. It was a totally different situation. So many times he started that process, but he said Satan hindered us. It was our will, but our will didn't count because there were other factors that came in. So it's important that we don't just take for granted we're going to do those things. I want you to just think quickly with me about some examples. Over in Luke chapter 6 and in verse, let's see. No, I tell you what, let's go to Luke chapter 12 and let's begin in verse 16, where we read about the ground of a certain rich man. It yielded plentifully. Well, that's always good news, right? Well, look what happens. He thought within himself, saying, "What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops?" So he said, "I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you've provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Now, the context of this parable that Jesus tells has to do with covetousness and putting too much stock in this world's goods. But it demonstrates another point within the same parable, and that is this man, just because he had a good crop, assumed that that's the way his life would go. That this crop would last him. He'd continue to have good crops. He didn't think about how this could affect those around him who were needy, that he now had the opportunity to help. There's no mention of that. And he just assumed that he was going to go on. He said, you have many goods laid up for many years. And so the implication being that he would be around to enjoy those things for many years, but we don't know that. That's what James is trying to teach us. And, we need to realize that you don't just take things for granted. Matthew 7, verse 21, Jesus said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Just because you call Jesus Lord, don't take it for granted that you will be in heaven. He says, but he who does the will of my Father who's in heaven. Many people believe in Jesus, but do they do his will? Can't just assume, can't just take it for granted. You can't take anything for granted. You read the parable of the Good Samaritan over in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37. And there's a priest and a Levite who pass by. Now, these are the important people, the leaders that are supposed to be the most devoted to God. And yet, normally we would take for granted these people are doing right. And yet the parable demonstrates that they were not doing right, and it was a lowly Samaritan. I say that accommodatively. That's the way the Jews looked at the Samaritans. No one is lowly in God's eyes. But it's this Samaritan that shows us the right way to go. Don't take for granted that the religious are always doing things right. Always go back to the pattern in the Bible. And as we end, I also want to think about the other side of the coin. Over in Matthew chapter 19 and